I'm Alexander Lowry, and welcome to this special bonus episode of the Boardroom Bound podcast. For me, it's always a lot of fun thinking, how do I share different content with our listeners? And I thought I should take the show on the road. Of course, in the COVID world, there's not really any road to go on these days, but I can bring you with me. So I do a lot of Zoom recordings these days, as I'm assuming a lot of you have those sorts of meetings. And one of those was working with State Street. State Street is one of the largest and most important financial organizations in the world. Basically, I think there are three finance companies that change the world: Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, because they have that many shares of influence on so many large companies that companies are always eager to talk to them. Well, I had a chance to go talk to State Street. They wanted me to run a webinar for their senior executive women to teach them the skills, the network, the information, the background, open the doors in order to land board seats. So what I did is I brought 4 of my friends on with me, and we had a great panel discussion, and I'm inviting you into that conversation. Imagine there were 100 State Street people listening to the conversation, and now several thousand of our audience. It's relevant for all of us. I think you'll have a lot of fun diving into it. The guests are all people you may have heard before, having listened to my podcast. Well, one is an upcoming episode, but the sort of people, that quality of conversation you would get on our show anyway. But now you get a chance to hear them dialogue, not just with me, but with each other. And of course, some questions and answers from our audience. I'm excited to share this special bonus episode with you today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Mansfield. I am the Managing Director with the State Street's Global Client Division. I'm also the former co-chair of the Professional Women's Network. We're hosting the event today, so I really appreciate everyone joining. We are very, very honored to have this distinguished panel. I wanted to introduce our facilitator, Alexander Lowry, and he is the Professor of Finance at Gordon College. He also leads the Masters in Finance Analysis program, and he has over 20 years of commercial experience in financial services, also including a former role as Deputy COO of JP Morgan, U.S. Private Bank. So currently, Alexander is in a board position, seeking board positions with Private Directors Association, the YMCA of the North Shore, in 2020 Women on Boards. He has previous board experience, including pension trustee for PA Consulting Group and chairing Haverford College Annual Fund Executive Committee. He is globally recognized, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen Alexander out in social media, and we're very honored to have him as a facilitator today. He will be introducing our panel. But I wanted to talk a little bit about background on how this event came about and what we're hoping to accomplish today. The Professional Women's Network at State Street is approximately over 5,000 members, and we've been in place for quite a while. We have many programs that focus on mentoring and sponsorships, a lot of events we have hosted over the years, and really looking to expand and bridge into how do we support our network in navigating board positions, networking around with other folks around how do we connect to the right people that can help us land board positions, and how can we really start to think about the future of our careers pivoting to board positions, whether those be nonprofit at various different points in your career. So again, I want to spend most of the time with our panelists, looking really forward to learning more following this discussion about how we can continue the discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alexander.
Stephanie, thank you. It is a pleasure to be with all of you today in the new world and the new times that we live in. I feel like we're in each other's living room. We're all each other's personal spaces. And that's actually what I'm going to invite you to do. So the 4 panelists that we're going to have on today, I consider friends. I consider all of them boardroom experts. Now, I'll admit I'm a governance geek. I love being on boards. I love talking about boards. That's why I started the Boardroom Bound podcast, so people can look over my shoulder and be involved in the conversations I get to have. And it should feel like that for you today. You're going to hear some honest, some candid feedback, some straight talk, and we're going to have a great amount of time for you to hear from all of these experts, but then we're also setting aside the 10 minutes at the end for you to have your Q&A answer. So there is the Q&A feature that you have at the bottom. You are welcome to put your comments, your suggestions, your questions in there. We'll get through as many of those as we can. You're welcome to do them throughout the session as we go today. So we have a slide that sort of lays out who our four panelists are. And from my perspective, I will just give you 30 seconds on each, and then I want them to do their proper introduction because you'll get to hear their elevator pitch and a little bit of background about them as well. So Sarah Faber is on a massive board that you're not going to think of because it's sort of what we'd call in the UK like a quango. It sort of feels like a quasi-government, quasi-private, and it has the best story in the world about how that board role came out. You're going to love that. Maria Garcia Nielsen is a great example of someone who has done constant learning for being on the board. And that's what you're always doing. What do I learn more about? What are the problems I need to solve? The certifications that she's gone and gotten are world class. And Felicity Hassan is someone who I think has set the pace in the executive search world for diverse candidates getting on boards. Not just women, not just minorities. We think the diversity of thought is essential. You cannot innovate without diversity in a boardroom, and she has set that pace. So I wanted her to be able to share why that's important and what we're seeing happening in the industry today and the trends you should know about. And Lauren Harrell is someone who actually is a co-chair with me for the 2020 Women on Boards event that we're hosting for Boston on November 18th. And she is the best world's networker that I have ever met for boards. And I want you to experience what she goes through and hear a bit about her story and her best practice ideas. So I'm going to invite my four panelists to unmute themselves and to turn on their video. And we'll start by each one of them in the order that you see on the slides, going through and doing their introduction. So we'll start with Sarah first.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Faber. I am currently a business evolution coach. And as Alexander mentioned, I'm a public company board director as well as a private company tech startup board director. And I'm on the advisory board for NACD Texas Tri-Cities. I'm passionate about governance, so I join Alexander in being a governance geek. And business as a force for good, especially around sustainability, environmental, and social justice. My background is in ag and biotech, and that's my ranch behind me, although I'm not there because I don't have good enough internet to do Zoom calls from there, unfortunately. I've had a very varied career. I was a professor and a scientist on the Human and Livestock Genome Projects, and I started 2 biotech startups in the crazy .com heyday, which is now getting to be 20 years ago. I got really, really burned out on VCs and business. It's nothing personal. It's just business attitude. And I became a corporate dropout and started a grass-fed beef company. And during that process, I got my first board seat, and I'll relate that story here in a second. Once I got on the board, I fell in love with governance. Who really thinks they're going to ever say that? And that led me to becoming a business evolution coach. And I split my coaching time between helping really outstanding young executives work towards getting their first board seat and working with startups and rapidly growing companies and their executives that are interested in integrating profit and purpose. So as promised, how I got my first board seat, it almost is 2 men walked into a bar. I was sitting at the farmer's market and I got a call from the White House personnel office. I nearly hung up on them because who really believes that the White House is calling you, especially when it's a blocked number? It was kind of like, yeah, right. But why they called me is when President Obama got elected, he opened up Move On or change.gov, I think was it. And you could put your resume in to be considered for a position in his administration. And I thought that was really cool. I didn't believe they would ever actually do anything with all those resumes. And I must have had the right keywords because they pulled me out and they called me up out of the blue and asked if I wanted to be considered for the board of directors of Farmer Mac, which is a New York Stock Exchange publicly traded ag mortgage GSE. So if you've heard of Fannie and Freddie, we're the dirt cousin of Fannie and Freddie. I said yes. I went through a very bizarre board vetting process, which included a security clearance that's, I think FBI told me was the same as all the way up to the VP has to go through. They interviewed all of my ex-husbands, everybody you could think of. And I ended up on the board, and I've been there for 11 years, and it's been really a wild ride.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll go next. I was next on that picture that Alexander showed, and that's a great story, Sarah. So I'm calling from Madrid, Spain. You're actually seeing my living room, and I'm really glad to be here. My name is Maria Garcia Nielsen. I am an independent board member now. I'm currently sitting on 2 privately held boards, both of them second generation and third generation family owned. And I'm also on an advisory board for a med health company that prints teeth, digitally printed teeth, all the way from the capture digitally of the problem to printing in 3D printings, which sounds amazing to me. I'm also sitting on 2 nonprofits, one in the US, one in Spain. And it's part of my portfolio life. So I have left my corporate career. My last stint as an executive I was the Office Depot CEO for Spain and Portugal. And as I thought about my next role, I thought about board service. That seemed logical to me. And as Alexander has shared, I did what I had always done. So I studied, I understood the sort of space that I was about to enter. And I'm happy to share what my learnings were, because as many people, I don't think I took the straight path. I think there's some learnings in my experience that I can share and hopefully help other people get there faster. With that, I'm also the co-president of a women's network. It's called Women Execs on Boards, and it's the extension of a Harvard program. They started a governance program in 2016. It's called Women on Boards. But because not everything is learned through a course, we learned that we needed this network support to help each other be held accountable as to what our plans were to get on a board, how to network, how to prepare for an interview, etc. I'm hoping to share some of my learnings with you, and glad to be here.
Thanks, Maria. My name is Felicity Hassan. I am the managing director for Ordelis and Evolve. They are a search business and a advisory and consulting firm, both dedicated to leveling the playing field for diverse talent. So our objective is to work with people really to widen the net or widen the gate rather than lowering the bar for talent. So all very much kind of dedicated towards diversity. You can hear from my accent that I'm English. I moved to New York in 2008, which was a horrible time to do so. The entire economy collapsed shortly thereafter. But it was a great learning curve for me. So I've been in search now for about 18 years. Did some time at Bloomberg and with Amazon, so gained some great breadth both on the search side and then subsequently in-house. I'm incredibly passionate about diversity, not just as a woman in a very kind of male-dominated field, but also as a woman married to an Egyptian with mixed-race children. So diversity is something which is very, very core to everything that I do. From a board service perspective, I have recently joined the board of the Women's Business Collaborative, which is a very kind of unique organization which brings together 39 women's groups, really with the spirit of faster together. Rather than competing with each other, which women have a bad reputation of doing, it's an opportunity for us all come together to drive each other forward, which is really kind of illustrated in the group of women that you have here today. So a real opportunity to kind of focus on network, which I know is going to come up a lot in today's conversation. Outside of that, obviously the core reason where I'm speaking today is the responsibility of search in terms of diversifying the board. And I think historically search has not served this space that well, through sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. So I think it's very important that we really focus on the concept of an intentional approach in driving diversity going forward.
Thanks, Felicity. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Harrell, and I'm the head of commodities for the Financial Institutions Group at Chatham Financial, which is a global debt and derivatives advisory firm out of Pennsylvania. I built and scaled a business line which provides energy hedging services to banks that lend to oil and gas producers. And I also serve as a key member of our LIBOR SOFR transition team for the firm. I've been in banking, finance, and audit for about 17 years now, so my whole career has really been spent very much on the finance side. And having worked both internally for finance, risk, and audit firms, and as an external advisor across the finance enterprise, I really bring a multiple stakeholder focus and deep finance knowledge to the boardroom as a qualified financial expert. And my ability to translate complex business requirements into technology solutions allows me to add value to a board whose company is looking to scale their business in anticipation of rapid growth. From a networking standpoint, I've served on about a dozen boards and advisory boards, and it's always been about my network. And so to speak to my current prominent roles, it really came about through an appointment to a government commission for my county, and the chair of that board served on an advisory board for a $12 billion bank. They didn't have many women on their board. They did not have generational diversity. And so she recommended me to the head of the advisory board. I subsequently landed a role on that advisory board. And in meeting with their senior executive team, I met with their chief legal officer, and she was the head of a nom-gov committee for one of the largest health and human services agencies in Philadelphia. And as a result of that, I ended up getting on that board. It's a really large nonprofit, about $100+ million budget nonprofit. And I started that board right as COVID hit in March of this year.
So you have a lot of real world experience between these four panel members today, and I'm excited for their stories they're going to share with you. And you've already sensed that they're going to give you the honest truth. They're going to tell you what it's like, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. So that's where I want to start, because I know there's a range of experiences and desires of our audience, from some people who might just want to be on nonprofits and give back, others that are looking to say someday maybe have just a portfolio of board companies like Maria, and that's what they do full time, and they're stepping stones to get there. So I think it's easy for many of us to look back at movies from, say, the 80s, if I can date myself that way, and go, what did it look like in a boardroom? People put their foot up on the table, they smoked a cigar, they opened the board pack when they got in the room, they collected a nice check, and that was it. And they went to the country club. And it's not really like that anymore. So I just want to set the expectations for what we're going to talk about today. So Maria, why don't you just set the scene for us a little bit? What are the major functions that a director has to perform?
Okay, thank you. And feel free to, let me know if I'm overextending myself or anybody else if they want to add something to my message. So when you think about the functions of the board, it is a good practice to start out with the segmentation that Alexander and it's been mentioned before. So it is quite different to be on a nonprofit. I think there are some differences also between private, public, family owned, right? So there are some nuances. However, I think the broader element to consider is that there are fiduciary duties, right? And for those of you that do not come from a legal background, I'm an engineer. I didn't really know when I came into this space that was actually a duty. I had served on boards while I worked in private equity. But in that, I think we went with our approach of looking after our investment and looking after our exit strategy. When I took those courses that I mentioned, it really honed on me that there were these legal responsibilities that basically come into two chapters, right? The duty of loyalty, sort of, watch out for those conflicts of interest, putting the corporation or the entity in front of your personal interests, that whole idea of confidentiality, fairness, and besides duty of loyalty, you have duty of care. So you have to be very diligent in paying attention to how you exercise good judgment in every decision. Whether you're an expert or not, should you not be an expert, you seek information. So those are sort of the two major areas of this idea of fiduciary duty. The third one is obedience, which is more, you just have to do the right thing and follow the rules and regulations that are included in the bylaws of your board. I did want to mention, though, that you do have to be cognizant of the geographic implications. As I said, I'm in Spain. So when a multinational deals with, local regulations, or should you seek a board in another geography besides the US, you have to be compliant if you're a public board. And in any geography, you have to follow, whatever the law states. So you do have to do your due diligence and understand what you're getting into. I'll say also to that in some geographies, not only is the law that's sort of taking care of what the board does, it's also a code of best practices, right? So you either comply or explain, and this is more the case in the UK. And there are lots of organizations like the ICGN, this is the International Council of Governance Network, that continuously improve the state of governance by enforcing best practices, and everybody wants to comply with those. If I go to the function, what do you do when you go into the boardroom? You don't sit and smoke cigars. I would highlight 3 things. First of all, strategy. You do have to own the strategy, even though the executive, and there's an asymmetry of information, they are rolling their sleeves and working on the strategy, but you do have to apply that oversight through your experience for strategy. The second thing is you are responsible for naming the CEO. So the main, duty for that collective reasoning of the board is to make sure that the CEO is well placed, and their succession plan is also, already, a part of how you develop the strategy. And the last thing is more, you do have to be compliant. You do have to know the business. And for those of you that are interested and don't come up with a P&L experience, I would always suggest that you are conversant with a P&L, a balance sheet, because that is the language of the boardroom, those financial statements. So it's always good to be, up to speed on that language. And I don't know if, Alexander, with that, I sort of set the tone and answered the question.
Well, that's helpful. And there's one other key thing that I'd like us to make sure we set the tone on is expectations, in addition to that, of timing. So the idea that you just show up once a quarter, I don't think anybody believes it anymore in the world of COVID. So anybody on a board now is meeting maybe every week, maybe multiple times a week, depending on what's going on. Some of these things are in chaos. Like one of Lauren's nonprofit boards distributes food. That's a pretty busy time, but every company's doing this sort of stuff. Sarah, I'd love if you could give us a little bit of experience, not only from your board, but what you coach other people on is what to expect and what that looks and feels like, and what we typically say, but maybe what we say during COVID now.
So sure. And I love your characterization of old guys smoking cigars with their feet up on the table. Because when I came on Farmer Mac's board, it was a year or so after they had gotten themselves into some pretty strong trouble, because the board had been what's called a rubber stamp board. And so when I came on the board was the transition from rubber stamp to real meaningful governance. And it's been really educational to be part of that. And that's how I got involved with the National Association of Corporate Directors. I am one of those people, because I wear so many hats, I actually track my time and try to keep my efforts aligned with where my intentions and what's important is. It's one of the things I coach on. And interestingly, NACD says that historically a public company board will take about 200 to 250 hours of time. And I have found that to be pretty accurate. If you add in, I'm a board governance geek, so I do a lot of extra governance education. I'm a governance fellow, and I'm finishing up a certification in one thing, and I've signed up for my next certification. So if you're like that, you can add that extra time. Since coronavirus has happened, my board started out meeting every week. We now meet every other week. There's a lot more communication, so I might not be quite double the amount of time But one thing to be aware is when you serve on a board, you don't get to decide, no, I'm not going to spend that time. You are committing to be there when you're needed. I'm also on the board of a startup, and those can be wildly different in their time frames. This one's pretty well run, got a great culture. I came in 5 or 6 years in, but they're under a lawsuit. So when things heat up with a lawsuit, we may be on the phone at 11 o'clock at night. And then there are times when we go 2 months without talking to the CEO other than just a couple of emails and, hey, here's the month's financials. And you just need to make sure you have time, especially if this is your first board position. And we're going to talk about this later, but networking is a huge part of how you get a board and how people see you in action in whether you're on a nonprofit board or an advisory board or part of a professional organization. Don't make a commitment you don't have the time for, because that's going to be your biggest letter of reference for getting another board seat.
I think that's a great segue that I'd love to bring Felicity in this conversation, because in addition to doing board work, you also have that perspective of filling board seats. And you have your finger on the pulse of both the general and the specific competencies that are going to be sought in the director searches. Now, we've heard Maria give some of those examples and ideas, and it's hard to generalize it because some are industry specific. But, if a company comes to you and says, all right, Felicity, we need you to go find the perfect person for us. How does it work? How do you do it?
Yeah, I think that there's the general approach of kind of building a brief, which is really going to dig down on exactly what it is that board needs. I think historically there's been kind of a very traditional sense of what boards are looking for, and that's kind of fallen into some very, very kind of predictable buckets of you need to have been a CEO in the past, or you need to have been like the CFO, or you need to have been in one of those C-suite positions, which kind of most closely aligns to somebody who can probably pick up those corporate governance and fiduciary responsibilities that Maria and Sarah so eloquently talked about. So I think it's a matter of kind of really, from my perspective, particularly when I'm working with clients to try and think about diverse candidates that they're thinking about for their board, it's about how are they going to take an intentional approach to actually expanding that remit. So trying to encourage them to think about the broad responsibilities that they're looking at. And, as we've established today, whether that's a private board or a public board or a nonprofit board, those responsibilities are going to be wildly different from one organization to the next. So I think it's really a matter of kind of identifying what the breadth is. I think a lot of the things which are missing from boards at the moment is because they've had a very traditional approach to how they have sourced board members in the past through their network, often through the country club or the golf course, as we all know. They're ending up with very kind of similar talent. The challenges that we're facing today in terms of expanding into new markets and having to innovate in order to remain relevant actually have kind of forced organizations to look for skill sets that they might not necessarily have commonly gravitated towards, and individuals that might, shockingly, not be at the golf course. So if you're thinking about technical acumen, if you're thinking about kind of digital know-how, Lauren in her introduction talked about, that incredible ability to translate between, the finance responsibilities and like the tech output. Like those kind of skill sets are going to require you to expand the remit of what it is that you're looking for. So I think as a candidate coming into this process, whether you have board experience or not, you need to kind of understand that the board process has not evolved as quickly as the executive space has. And therefore, there is still a fairly traditional way of looking at candidates. And you have to kind of meet the board in the middle somewhere. They will have a specific set of requirements and expectations of what it is that they're looking for. And in order to kind of meet them in the middle, in order to kind of get to that place where you can innovate and add value, I think the most important thing for candidates coming into this space is to really be able to demonstrate what applicable experience they've had or what exposure they've had to the boardroom already. Because actually the executive experience is really important, but what will really kind of resonate with the boardroom is this is the experience that I've had with the board before. whether or not it's in a board seat or whether or not it's just in my capacity as an executive and that exposure, I think that is going to be the really important point. And certainly from a women perspective, some of the feedback that I've gotten, even from very progressive chairmen in this space is, we would love to have diversified our board, but there was just a shortage of talent in this space, which obviously I try and keep a straight face and tie myself to the chair if I could leap over. But look, I think the general sense is that, even now that they're meeting more women, and that's becoming a very tired excuse, we're now in this kind of portfolio mindset of now I can come in and I can build my portfolio, and that's what I'm looking to do. And again, we need to be cognizant that in many respects we're working with a very traditional crowd, and it's going to be really important to both kind of demonstrate your ambition in this space, but also to counter that and to anchor it in what Maria was talking about, which is a focus on organization before self. Because the focus on portfolio and what you're committed to do in the longer term from a career perspective can detract from your focus on this particular board opportunity. So that's what I would say. In a nutshell, from my perspective, I'm looking to try and expand it as much as possible from the client side. From a candidate perspective, I would say it's really about thinking about that relevant experience and then how you couch it to your audience.
So it's really interesting. So Felicity, part of what I take from you is you have to be able to check certain boxes, right? You're going to have to be able to do that. And we'll assume that the final round of candidates of, say, 6 people, they all meet the specs. Like, that's the job. But then how do you stand out from that? But you have to get yourself in there somewhere, right? So you have to be able to translate the information, but you also need someone to be able to probably give you an opportunity. How do you get the job, that experience? I got experience without a job. So Lauren, I'm going to invite you here for a second because I've been amazed by the way you have intentionally and thoughtfully and consistently gone forward with your board networking stuff. I think it's a best practice model that I would recommend to everybody. You actually have a CRM system that you use. A lot of us would joke about that, but you do it. And I would love for you to share. You gave some in your pitch in the beginning. I did this, which led to this, which led to this. Some of it might be serendipity, but a lot of it was hard work. Can you share how you go about, not only do you know your story, but to make that story known to the relevant people?
Sure, absolutely. And I think approaching networking, there's several different ways to go about it, and they're all simultaneous, and that's how I've kind of approached it. So the first thing I really set out to do, as Alexander mentioned and others on the panel, is really understanding the value that you bring to the table. Why do you want to serve on a board? What have you done in your work role that would translate into the boardroom? So for example, in my elevator pitch, I talked about being a qualified financial expert. That's something that is sought after. Financial literacy is really important on board. So I'm sure to highlight that in my elevator pitch. But in order to get there, I had to go back and look at the regulations and say, do I even qualify as a qualified financial expert? And I had others opine on that. I talk about my translation of complex business requirements into technology and how that translates into scaling businesses. That all came about through real self-reflection. And I actually work with a coach. I work with Sarah Favor, who is on the panel. She is my mentor and she is my board coach. And her services have been really invaluable to me in identifying exactly why I would add value to a board. So I think that's important because when you get to a spot where you're surrounded by folks who have influence in the boardroom or who sit in board positions, they're going to ask you these questions. They're going to ask you, okay, what have you done? What's your role here? Why do you want to sit on a board? And I will never forget, I was at a conference last year and I was asked by somebody very high up who was actually a co-founder at Glass Lewis. And he asked me, why do you want to serve on a board? I had a fairly decent answer, but it was a question that I hadn't been asked before, and I felt that I wasn't as prepared for that answer. So the things that I try to do along with my coaching sessions with Sarah is I keep a list of what I've done in my work life. I keep a list of what I've done in my board roles, and I actually have bullet point snippets that I've put together. I have longer elevator speeches. I have a short bio. I have a long bio. I have all sorts of other things that I've identified through the use of tools like strength finders, other value identification exercises, certainly through my work with Sarah. And that allows me to be really intentional when I'm networking. I would strongly suggest for folks that are interested in this space, you really have to surround yourself with folks that are in the boardroom. So get familiar with places like NACD, Private Directors Association, Athena Alliance, Women in the Boardroom, 2020 Women on Boards. You know, if 65 to 85% of board roles are won through network, I want to place myself where the odds are highest. And when I go into these events, maybe contrary to popular thought, I don't think about myself. That's the last person I'm thinking about. I know my network so well. Through my CRM system that Alexander mentioned, I tag all of my network. So I can sit here and tell you that 25% of my network is NACD board members and, members at large. I can tell you that about 40% of my network are C-suite or founders for their organizations. So it's that type of specificity that allows me, when I'm at director events, I'm thinking about, okay, who should I connect with whom? And that really is my secret sauce. So just a quick example for an event that I went to in March before everything closed down due to COVID, I probably connected with maybe 20 different individuals, but I probably referred out maybe 15 of those to various speaking opportunities, podcast opportunities, connected them with others inside of my network, and partnerships have developed as a result, and meaningful business relationships have come about. And, I now get phone calls from people saying, Lauren, can you connect me with so-and-so? I'm looking to do this. Can you help me with that? And I think that that's been, a key to my success so far.
So I've got a question here, and I'm going to open it up to the group to respond to. So there's some questions about how do we actually do this networking stuff that you guys speak of, right? This big nebulous term, how do we break it down? And for some people, they're saying, well, that's what LinkedIn is, right? I do that, and that's really good and good enough. And I would say yes and no. Thoughts from the group?
I think it comes back to this concept of being intentional. I think, it's a little bit like, putting out a job search and hoping to get like a diverse pool of applicants. It's never going to happen. So if you put yourself out there on LinkedIn, that's an important first step, because that's probably one of the most discoverable methods of kind of getting your message out to the world. So it's really important, I think, that you have kind of a public profile and a public persona that people can kind of leverage in order to kind of get to know you on a surface level. But I think what we've heard from everyone today, and I'm sure everyone can kind of chip in on, is, you have to really work at this. You have to work at this. You have to learn, you have to develop, you have to identify people who can add value, who can teach you. It's a constant process of connection to connection to connection. And that takes a CRM. That actually takes the kind of level of organization that Lauren is talking about. So if you think that you can sit back and these opportunities will come to you based on your hard work, it's just not going to happen. In my mind, I put it out to the rest of you, but that's my view.
I also wanted to comment that I think I mentioned it to the group when we were prepping for this, that I do believe that you need a CRM, but sometimes when you first approach the idea of, okay, I need to network, because everybody tells you this, thing about networking to get your boards. One thing that really helped me, I came across a tool through BoardSpan. BoardSpan is another search firm. They're also, very intentional, I think, about diversity. But they, in trying to get your profile into their database, one of the things they offer is, your typical survey elements. You fill it out, you tell about yourself. They take you then to give you some feedback with great phrases that you can actually use in your board bio and your CV about your strengths, your strategic focus. They have good phrasing. But one of the things I really like is that they then ask you to map out your network, and they sort of invite you to think of your neighbors, the people you went to school with, people that you came across in your parents' association. And then they ask you for that second element, which Lauren also pointed out to, right? What do you know about them, and how much influence may they have in a boardroom? Maybe it's because they're married to somebody. It's not even because they are the executive themselves. So once you tag that in, it just creates this idea, you can sort of picture the 2x2 a mapping of saying, okay, so there's a quadrant out there of people that know me really well that I don't have to explain my value add to because they've followed my career over time and they are very influential. And then you begin that networking in also like Lauren mentioned, not by calling and asking, I want a board, but really reconnecting and saying, so what are you up to? How can I help you? Because then that creates that engagement, right, of value add both ways. So I think there's some tools out there. It's all about your self, introspection, right? So knowing about yourself, who you know, and intentional about, yes, holding yourself accountable, whether you do it with a coach or with a group of friends or people where you state that you want to do this and they keep checking on you that you're actually delivering on that path that you've put yourself into.
Yeah, I agree with Maria and Felicity. And maybe to add specifically how I use LinkedIn, I think it goes without saying nowadays your whole profile should be filled out, but I think that there's a way to position yourself on that profile that would really identify more of a board-centered focus, maybe versus kind of what your day job is. So if you look at my profile, yes, I do have my day job stuff listed there. I do have articles and things that I've published or been interviewed for specific to my day job, but I also strongly highlight, where my focus is from a board perspective. I'm an audit chair, things of that nature. So it really demonstrates that experience. But I will say that from a tactical level, when somebody connects with me on LinkedIn, I always follow up with a message afterwards. So if they reached out to me, I always respond and say, hey, thanks for connecting. It looks like we share these things in common. If you have time to, have a quick Zoom call, let's talk about it. These times next week work for me. How about you? So I give them specific dates and times. I engage in the conversation, and I also move the conversation off of LinkedIn and I move it on to my email because that tracks in my CRM system. So that's how I deal with incoming requests to connect for me. For outgoing requests, when I meet somebody, I almost never send a connection request without a personal message. I always say something like, hey, it was nice to meet you at this event. While we didn't get a chance to connect further, I would like to talk to you more about X, Y, and Z. Hopefully I'll see you at the next NACD event. Thanks, Lauren. And I've gotten so many responses back that says, now that is an invitation I will gladly accept. You connected who you are to an event that we were at and added a personal message. I will make time for you all day long. So I think that that's a real easy way to approach networking, specifically using LinkedIn.
And as the coach, I have to chime in here. So one of the things Lauren does really well is she's intentional, but she also has a significant self-accountability. And so, I don't feel like what I know is rocket science, but just starting out with a plan, and it's kind of iterative. So if you're going to intentionally network, you need to work on your LinkedIn profile, but don't let not having the perfect LinkedIn profile keep you from reaching out. Know where you want to go, which means knowing what your value is. So there's all these kind of sequential steps, and it really helps to give yourself a timeline, give yourself, even if you say, I'm going to devote 3 hours a month to my board search. It's going to might take a while to get a board seat that way, but at least you're making progress, and it's never too early to start. And the more intentional you are, the more directed your networking is. And as both Lauren and Maria said, it's about creating relationships. So if you create relationships with interesting people who are in positions that influence the type of boards that you can add value to, those relationships might take 2 to 5 years to come back to something that leads to a board seat. But those are worth investing in.
And just to bring this home, there are lots of different ways to go about this, right? And it might vary on the industry you're in, maybe the geographic area you're in, where you are in your career, and everyone has to figure out their own approach. So we can give some good ideas about it, but it's going to be different for you based on, for example, whether you want to go into nonprofit and think that is a stepping stone to somewhere else, whether you do sort of a quango like Sarah has been doing, whether you're going, I liken it to playing baseball, like you don't start playing center field for the Yankees, you're going to work up from the minors as you move up and get more sophisticated. I might have worked at JP Morgan, but they're not about to invite me onto their board today, maybe someday, but that's probably down the line for me. So I would love us to open up a bit of a conversation for amongst the panel of how do you start? How do you go about getting the first board that leads to the next thing? And Felicity, I'm going to let you kick this off for us because it would be easy for each of us to say, well, I'm going to go join the nonprofit that I'm passionate about, and a company's going to see that I did great stuff there, and that's wonderful. Yes and no. It sort of depends a lot. So if you could just, Felicity, give us some thoughts about how a company looks at nonprofit board stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's all relative. So I would say there's definitely a philosophy in getting your start somewhere. If there's a cause that you feel particularly passionate about and you want to get kind of a basic understanding about what a board looks like, then there's no harm in going to join a nonprofit, adding value there and working your way towards a board seat, because it at least gives you a little bit of exposure. I'd say when I speak to candidates, I often give them the thoughts that fundamentally, if you're a little bit more thoughtful about the nonprofit board that you're with, you can also effectively select those boards where you can, to Sarah's point, develop those robust relationships with other people on the board that might serve on other boards that you can then potentially kind of develop relationships with. It all kind of pulls on everything that we've talked about today, from Sarah, from Lauren to Maria. You know, we're all talking about like constantly thinking about building relationships and network. So nonprofit for me is a good start for people who haven't had any board experience, because it gives you that opportunity of selfless service to a cause that you're passionate about, while simultaneously being thoughtful about where it could potentially lead. And I think if you then have an understanding, I think nonprofits can be quite time consuming as well. So I think if it gives you kind of some understanding about the additional commitments that you're going to be looking at over and above your day job, but also just kind of gives you some exposure. Again, to Lauren's point, I think it's like getting you in the room with other people that serve on boards. And I think a big point of learning here is that intellectual curiosity about understanding like who else is in this space. If you don't know who else is in this space and you're not within this network, it's going to be very difficult to break in. So, you know, sure, if you're doing 3 hours a month, whatever you're dedicating your time to, like make sure it's about surrounding yourself by people who are in the boardroom. And I think that's really the philosophy here. It's like building the relationships and making sure that the experience that you've got is relevant. But I'm thinking that like maybe starting with a nonprofit, and to your baseball analogy, kind of like building up from there, because a lot of this is very demanding. And if I'm thinking about some of the private equity firms, the private organizations that I've worked with, you're going in almost as a kind of quasi CEO. You could be kind of rebuilding organizations from scratch. I don't think that that's the kind of opportunity you want to throw yourself into without kind of the appropriate background and experience and time horizon in which to do it. So I think it's about really kind of making sure that you've got the knowledge base to really kind of make a difference and make an impact. And I think Lauren put it well in terms of like really understanding your value add. So understand the value add, surround yourself with the right people, get into the right networks, do some learning, and kind of scale from there.
Maybe to build on what Felicity said and how, you know, I've experienced nonprofits and how it's impacted my approach. I haven't just sat on nonprofit boards, but I've also been able to get into leadership on these boards, whether it's a committee chair or vice chair or actually chair of the board. And that's also been a great way to build up the governance experience. I would echo the rest of the panelists' sentiments where if you're going to be in that boardroom, folks are really paying attention and they're all very well connected individuals within your community. And you never know who knows who. And so every time I come into the boardroom, I try to bring my best self and I review the materials and I make sure that I'm asking thoughtful questions of management, specifically with nonprofits and NACD. You know, NACD does require you to serve on a board. in order to join as a member. And so for me, that was the way I was able to enter into the ranks of membership for NACD. So I think you can strategically use that. Yes, you want to have a good cause that you're aligned with. Obviously, you want to learn about the boardroom, but the added benefit, in my opinion, is that you can get into networks like NACD and further plug in. So I would consider that as well when you're looking to start building out your board career.
And I'll chime in. So I am incredibly lucky because I was literally plucked out of oblivion and put on a public company board. And to be honest, I don't think there is any other way I could have ended up in a public company boardroom. But now that I'm there, it's been 10 or 11 years, and I thought, I'm on a public company board. I'm a woman. I'll have offers rolling in, and it just didn't happen. And part of it is I wasn't a sitting CEO of a large company. I had been president of 2 biotechs, neither of which made it to profitability. We had good funding, but that .com crash didn't help. And it took a lot of intentional work, and a lot of additional education, governance fellowships. I became a serious student of governance, and it took networking. It took serving on nonprofit boards, doing some consulting, and ended up being asked to be on the board of one of the companies I consulted for. And now I'm in a position where I'm actually on the one of the directors to watch in the directors and boards that's coming out in August. So I went from a professional background that wouldn't have gotten me there, but that's why I try to help people get on boards, is because I've had to work every other possible angle to build my board credentials.
And I would just chime in on this, very quickly, that depending on who our audience is and where our audience is in their own journey, right? So for those younger members of the audience, I would say, if this is something that you're interested in, learn about your board, your own board, wherever you're working. Try to understand, who sits on your board. Who are they? Any opportunity that you have to step into that boardroom to present, to explain your work, take advantage of that. So I think if you're interested in governance, because it does matter in business, I think there's so many opportunities for you to at least raise your hand and show that that intention as we've been talking. The other thing that I would say as well is that when you're conversant on the issues around us, whether it's COVID, technology, AI, you also begin to understand what your passions are and where your value add is, right? So it's not only your experience, and hopefully your experience and your passions sort of match as well. So I think that as you observe the companies around you, observe the nonprofits or the individuals that you respect, you read about them, try to find out and map out, where are they operating? What do they talk about? How can I be conversant on that? So I think that learning, can also be part of what you set time aside early on in your career. If you have an opportunity when you are a sitting executive, it's always, I think, easier also to perhaps get on that one board. Normally, in my life of multinationals, they only allowed me one board to sit on. So try to take advantage of that opportunity, because it may be also easier, right? Rather than wait to retire from your day job and look for a portfolio of companies to sit on their boards.
And I'll just echo, it's never too early to start. I'm one of the women that I'm coaching. Her company is shutting down, and this is a great time for her to decide how important is it for her to get on a board, because if it is, she should be looking for a head of HR role rather than going into business for herself. She's got to weigh that as part of her whole thing. But the earlier you start, the more you can select career roles, outside involvement in your own company that leads to things that contribute to your board readiness.
Well, I knew what was going to happen with 4 great speakers like this, as the time was going to fly by. So we are under 10 minutes to go here, and we will have a 2-minute wrap up at the very end. So questions have been pouring in, and we'll see if we can get through one or two more here. And some of it is this a good time to be looking for board seats with COVID going on, or should I shelve it and wait for later? And a related question to that is like, how do you manage board work with a 9-to-5 job? And I don't know how many of us actually work 9 to 5 anymore, but with a full-time job and you have your board stuff, maybe in normal times, and these are not normal times. So we can see how those parry together. So we will take these as the last question. I'll open it up to the group.
I might comment on the looking for a board role during COVID. For me personally, the networking during this time frame has been the best that I've ever experienced. I think that because we're all so dislocated in our jobs, our personal lives, nothing seems to be the way that it used to be. I think it immediately creates a common thread. And so I have had conversations with folks, ranging from board members from, E-Trade, Humana, United Airlines. I mean, these are major corporations, and these board members are so willing to get on a call with you. They're willing to get on a Zoom with you. And, I ask them very specific questions, but this availability of time and the ability to utilize this technology has really changed the game for me on networking. And so I would say it's a great time actually. And there's lots of stuff that's getting published about handling crisis when you're on a board. And I would actually say that that's one of the things that I will now think of when I go to look for another role. You are shoulder to shoulder with these board members in a time of crisis. And is this the type of board that you want to be on when the stuff hits the fan? And so now it's a part of my decision-making criteria when I'm looking for my next board role.
I couldn't agree more. I feel like, also the factor that we're not kind of running around the office, we're not running around the city, everyone is doing everything sort of around anything to go by in sort of 30-minute increments of time in this like little box. So, your ability to actually fit in 4 times more meetings than you've ever done before has been increased exponentially. And I think I've consistently seen that, whether it's COVID-19 related or people saying, oh, it's the summertime, everyone's on vacation. Not so. That's the time when I actually probably get like my most meetings, because people are actually feeling much more chilled out and probably have a little bit more time on their hands. So I think I feel like, there's always a reason not to do something, but everything about what we talked about today really comes down to learning, commitment, and hard work. And so I think as long as you're kind of constantly, you don't have to be out there, really kind of hammering this every minute of every day. But I think setting aside and being organized about the time that you dedicate to this and really kind of taking advantage of people's availability right now I could not agree with Lauren more. This is an absolutely prime time. And by the way, diversity is hot right now. So if you're a woman looking to kind of get on a board right now, everyone is thinking, oh gosh, not only has Black Lives Matter highlighted the criminal lack of representation of the Black and African American community, but it's also highlighted just a general lack of diversity in the boardroom. And there's a real moment of awakening around, we really need to see representation of diversity in order to really move forward as a business. So this is another good time based on that philosophy.
And also to comment on Felicity's point, I think this crisis also sends you on an introspection moment, right? So I think it's also a good moment to find that time and see what grounds you, what are you all about. So it's a good moment to, if you haven't started that already, to review whether you are on the right path and whether you have the right ideas. And maybe we don't have time to talk about this, but not only diversity, but the whole idea of how we are so exposed, right? It's not just about climate change, as perhaps at the beginning of the year with Larry Fink's letter, everybody was talking about. This is much bigger. And again, it reminds, the humanity is exposed, and the ESG aspect of how we go about business, which includes diversity, which includes a more open view to decision making, is part of where we are right now. So I think it's also a good moment, not because of the time that we have available, but the time available to ourselves for self-reflection, and the time that is needed for corporations to, go through that process as well.
So I'm conscious that we're in our last couple of minutes here, and that's been a rapid sprint. So I'm going to allow my panelists to take a break, to turn off the video, probably grab a glass of water. And I just want to wrap it up because you have a chance to hear more from all of these great panelists today. So all of them have been published or soon to be published episodes on the Boardroom Bound podcast, which is great fun. And we're actually going to turn today's into a bonus episode as well. So if you wanted to revisit some of these thoughts and ideas, we will have them down if you wanted to listen to it in slow motion so you can take better notes and fully capture it. Otherwise, so Sarah was episode 14, Maria was episode 58, Felicity was episode 67, and Lauren's is soon to be released, and we will do a deeper dive into her CRM system and her best tips and hacks about how to do the networking stuff. One of my tips for you today is that you should reach out to all of these people and connect on LinkedIn. Make it a small world. What I have been amazed by is it is a small world in the boardroom space. And you start talking to people and they know other people, and it just sort of works. You invest the time and energy into it. And in addition to that, if you would like to listen to more of this content, you have the podcast. Boardroom Bound is there. It's free. It's available. It's every Wednesday. It is conversations that I get to have with people like this. And in addition, if you would like, I developed a free guide that I'd love to give away to people that is my sense of how to do a cheat sheet boardroom preparation stuff for you to launch your career. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Just drop me a note and we'll send it your way. And we were grateful to have some time with you today. Stephanie, thank you for inviting us in, and thank you to all of the panelists who joined us today and gave your expertise. That's it for this bonus episode of the podcast, and it was so much fun. I appreciate State Street inviting me in to talk to their senior executive women on landing board seats about how to build out their candidacy, develop a position of authority to find the right network, open the doors to the opportunities. And in some ways, it's just the sort of conversations that we have on this show on a weekly basis. And that's why it was so much fun for me to bring 4 people that I respected who have great insights into the boardroom space to have that conversation. And as opposed to me sitting here doing it normally as I do one-on-one, having 4 people virtually around the table. And I hope you got that sense that these are people that love having those conversations. It's going to be a key part for everybody listening to this show who want to land board seats, no matter where you are in your journey, to have those conversations. And virtual coffees are so easy today. They're something that everybody can do. And I would encourage you to take advantage of this time when most people are used to jumping on Zoom or Teams or whatever it is. So remember, you can do this. This is part of what you're setting out to do. These are the goals you're preparing yourself for. But a special thank you not only to State Street for hosting it, to my 4 panelists for being on the show and sharing their insights, but a special thank you to you, the listeners. And if you liked what you heard, I'd ask you to rate and review the Boardroom Bound podcast show because it helps people find us. And until then, we'll see you in the next normal episode of the podcast coming out every Wednesday.